Malcolm X was wrong about the field Negro and the house Negro. In a now famous speech delivered in 1963 in response to the March for Freedom and Jobs in Washington, D.C., where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech, Brother Malcolm took time to dive into a history lesson concerning plantation politics and the two types of slaves that were present at that time. Malcolm identified these two types of slaves as the field Negro and the house Negro. And it was a tactic that, for the time, given the dichotomy that existed between the Nation of Islam and Black Christian leadership, befitted Malcolm to paint himself as being a part of the masses. When in reality, Malcolm was no different than his Christian counterparts, subjecting himself and our people to another slave master in Islam under the Arabs, as opposed to the one we had become familiar with in America under the Europeans and Christianity. Malcolm X was wrong about the field and the house Negro. Upon closer examination, there was a gross failure on Malcolm's part to address the truth about life on the plantation. Malcolm's error and miscalculation has enabled a division that should have been squashed 60 years ago to continue to permeate as a hindrance to our progress and unification today. First off, let's address the truth about the house Negro. Contrary to the numerous portrayals of house Negroes in the media throughout the years, the house Negro was among the most beaten, terrorized, subjugated, and dehumanized of all the slaves on the plantation. How else were they able to be trusted by the master to be allowed to work in close proximity to the master himself and his family? When the master's house caught fire, it was the house Negro who was beaten and blamed for setting the blaze. When the master got sick, it was the house Negro who was beaten and blamed for the cause of the master's sickness. When the master didn't want to eat his food, it was the house Negro who was beaten and blamed for the food not being to his master's liking. You see, the house Negro never was his master's favorite, his chosen, or even his preferred. To the master, the house Negro was just an animal that he had a more secured understanding of. The wild horse that had been tamed, the dog that had been domesticated, the buck that didn't need to be broken. The love that the house Negro had for his master was cultivated out of fear. Everything the house Negro did in the name of advancing his master was driven by fear. Even the hatred and disdain that the house Negro had for those in the field came from a fear of the master's predisposition to allow guilt by association to lump the two together. The house Negro experienced firsthand the inner workings of the master's mind. Decisions on the selling of slaves, the splitting of families, the hypocrisy of their religion, the deviancy of their sexual impulses, and their unimaginable hatred for their slaves was all on display for the house Negro between serving his master's food, refilling his glass, lighting his cigar, changing his linens, and raising his children. The fear the house Negro had for his master was real. Now, on the other hand, we have to talk about the field Negro. While painting the house Negro as the main problem for slaves on the plantation besides the master, Brother Malcolm attempted to endear himself to the masses of our people by making the field Negro out to be more honorable than those in the house. But Malcolm X was wrong about the field Negro too. The reality is that most of the masses of Negroes who worked in the field were ignorant of the heinous nature of their condition. Oblivious to the bigger picture, much like the house Negro, the ones relegated to work out in the field, primary instinctive directive was to survive to see another day. When a Negro was whipped, they minded their business. Family got torn apart, they were thankful that it wasn't theirs. When the master's house caught fire, when the master got sick, they didn't care too much either way, because tomorrow would be just like yesterday and the day before it. Whatever the master said to eat, they ate. Whatever the master said to worship, they worshiped. Whatever the master said to celebrate, they celebrated. Whatever the master told them about life and the reason why things were the way that they were, they accepted it. This too was instilled in the field Negroes out of fear, but also because the slave master had another way of conquering and defeating those who he didn't trust to keep close. Now, I've always found it curious how nobody ever speaks about the abundant amount of alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, and the freedom of sexuality that was made available to slaves in the field. W.E.B. Du Bois famously wrote in his book, The Sociological Souls of Black Folks, an observation that he recorded of the base level morality that was prevalent on the plantation. Drugs, alcohol, and no strings attached sex was all granted to the Negroes in the field as a means of the master to ensure that those who he didn't deem a threat remained that way. So then, if Brother Malcolm was wrong about the field Negro, and if he was wrong about the house Negro, then who in the hell, in fact, was he talking about, and what does it have to do with where we are today? Well, Malcolm X's inexcusable omission that has caused us as a people to remain divided, pointing the finger at one another while remaining blind to the real culprit of our continued suffering, is this. Also present on the plantation, besides the Negroes in the field and the Negroes in the house, were the master's bastard children and the rebellious Negro. It was the master's bastard children hidden among those in the house and in the field that identified with the master more than he identified with himself. This is who was allowed to say, "We have a nice house," that comfort the master in his ailment, inquiring if we sick. This is the one who held with the conviction, the belief that there was no greater place that could be found than right there by his master's side. And it was the truth. For these children, it was not fear, but love and hope that one day they'd be the master that fueled them. And the rebellious Negro, who was also hidden among those in the house and in the field, were the slaves that possessed an unconquerable spirit. Their intelligence, understanding of life, and fear of not the master, but of the creator, who was a higher authority than a common man, is what drove them to resist their oppressor. These were the Negroes whose tongues were cut out for reading the Bible, the ones who prayed for a strong wind during the fire and prayed for death when the master's sickness came. This is who sang the songs of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Follow the Drinking Gourd, and Wade in the Water. These were the Toussaint Overtures, the Nat Turners, the Harriet Tubmans that the master actually feared. Feared because the master recognized that their spirit was endowed to them by the Most High, and if not dealt with harshly, would spread like a virus, destroying all that he had murdered, raped, and pillaged to acquire. And so it remains today, as it was on the plantation, as it was 60 years ago, as it has always been for God's chosen people under oppression, that the masses, whether in the field or in the house, powerless to make a change in their own right, remain fitted between the rebel and the bastard child of the oppressor. But let me make it clear about who is not a rebellious Negro. If you subscribe to a religion, whether it be Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Rastafari, or this new age, I am God, consciousness, the universe, and the alignment of the stars on the day of my birth made me do it bullshit, then you are just a slave. If you deny the morality of the Most High and engage in an unlawful lifestyle, which includes smoking, LGBTQ, interracial sex, selling of drugs, the using of drugs, and the sexual exploitation of men, women, or children, then you are just a slave. If you're a criminal, if you vote, if you celebrate the 4th of July, if you're pro abortion, if you don't hold the oppressors of today accountable for inheriting the wealth of their murderous fathers, then you are just a slave. Whether you're rich or poor, grew up with both parents or were an orphan, came up in the suburbs or navigated your way through the streets, the reality is that today the masses of our people are just slaves. Who then are the oppressor's bastard children? Well, today, in the black, brown, and indigenous community, we refer to them as leaders. They have been passing for one of us for generations while doing the bidding of their fathers, the oppressor, to ensure that we never find a way back to our power. These are the pioneers of your black Masonic lodges, Greek frat and sorority organizations, civil rights movement, the founders of the NAACP, and early proponents of desegregation. Those who hold the highest seats in your religious institutions at the forefront of your push for equality and acceptance, and those who have diligently stood by the oppressor while they've devised every scheme and plot imaginable to wipe us out. So then, who are the rebels of today? They are the men of the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge under commanding General Yohana. Since 1969, we have been teaching our people the truth according to the Bible. And what is the truth? The truth is that so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians descend from the greatest people that have ever walked the face of the earth, and the Bible identifies us as the lost 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And in the year 2023, there is nothing more important than for God's chosen people to find out the truth of who they are, where they come from, and what their purpose is in the earth. So when you see us in the streets, watch us on the internet, encounter us on social media, just know that we are the voice for the righteousness that was almost lost in the earth. That's why they tell you we're a hate group. They tell you that we're the black KKK. And they tell you that we're a cult. Why? Because the spirit of the Most High that guides us is infectious, unrelenting, and cannot be stopped. They are afraid that unless they demonize us to the masses, those of you that are in the house and in the field might just start listening. You might fuck around and become a part of the revolution. So yeah, I'm an angry black man, but I know exactly what it is that I'm talking about. Shalom.